Captain Sarah Chen was conducting her routine pre-flight checks on Prince's private jet when she noticed something unusual. Prince, who normally boarded last and sat in complete silence during flights, had arrived early and was already in his seat, gripping the armrests with white knuckles. It was April 15, 2015, and they were preparing to fly from Los Angeles to Minneapolis after Prince had finished a series of late-night recording sessions. Sarah had been Prince's preferred pilot for 3 years, hired specifically because she understood his need for privacy and never asked questions. But as a former paramedic who'd worked emergency response for 8 years before becoming a pilot, Sarah recognized the physical signs of distress immediately. What happened during the next 90 minutes would become a race against time at 30,000 feet and reveal the hidden struggles that even legends carry in silence. Sarah had flown Prince dozens of times. The routine was always the same. Prince would board quietly, sit in his preferred seat by the window, and either sleep or work on a laptop during the flight. He never engaged in conversation beyond polite greetings. He never complained. He was, by all accounts, the easiest, high-profile client Sarah had ever flown. But today was different. Prince had boarded 30 minutes before departure, which never happened. And when Sarah did her cabin check before takeoff, she noticed his breathing was rapid and shallow. "Mr. Nelson, are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked professionally. Prince looked up, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "I'm fine," Prince said, but his voice was tight, just tired. Sarah's paramedic instincts kicked in immediately. Rapid breathing, pale complexion, excessive sweating, trembling hands. These weren't signs of exhaustion. These were signs of a panic attack, or potentially something cardiac. "Sir, I need to ask you some questions before we take off," Sarah said firmly but kindly. "Are you experiencing any chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness?" Prince hesitated, and in that hesitation Sarah knew she was right. "I just need to get home," Prince said. "Please, just fly me home." Sarah made a split-second decision that would either save Prince's life or cost her career. "I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson, but I can't take off with a passenger in medical distress. I'm calling for medical personnel." Prince's response was immediate and desperate. "No doctors, no hospitals. No one can know about this. Please, just fly. I'll be fine once we're in the air." But Sarah had seen this before, during her paramedic days. People in crisis often refused help, insisted they were fine, prioritized privacy over safety. And sometimes, that refusal killed them. "Mr. Nelson, with all due respect, I'm not just your pilot. I'm a former paramedic. And what I'm seeing right now tells me you're having either a panic attack or a cardiac event. Either way, we're not taking off until I know you're stable." Prince looked at her with an expression that broke through all the walls he'd built. "I can't go to a hospital. If this gets out, if people know I'm weak, it destroys everything I've built." Those words revealed everything Sarah needed to know. This wasn't about physical health. This was about image, reputation, the impossible burden of being Prince. Sarah made another decision. "Okay, no hospital, but you're going to let me assess you properly, and if I think you're having a cardiac event, we're calling an ambulance whether you like it or not. Deal?" Prince nodded reluctantly. Sarah grabbed her personal medical kit, something she always carried from her paramedic days. She checked Prince's pulse, blood pressure, oxygen levels. His vitals were elevated, but not dangerously so. No signs of heart attack, but clear signs of severe anxiety. "Mr. Nelson, I think you're having a panic attack." "Have you had these before?" Prince's answer was barely a whisper. "For years. But never this bad." Sarah sat down across from Prince. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to teach you a breathing technique that will help. But first, I need you to be honest with me. What triggered this? What happened that made today different?" Prince was silent for a long moment. Then, perhaps because they were alone, perhaps because he was too exhausted to maintain the facade, perhaps because Sarah's medical authority gave him permission to be vulnerable, he started talking. "I flew back from Atlanta 3 days ago," Prince said quietly. "Had a bad reaction to pain medication on that flight. Thought I was dying. My security had to give me something to bring me down. Since then, every time I think about getting on a plane, I feel like I can't breathe. Sarah's trained mind immediately caught the critical detail. Had to give me something to bring me down. That suggested Prince was taking medications beyond what a normal panic attack would require. "Mr. Nelson, what medications are you currently taking?" Sarah asked carefully. Prince's resistance flared. "That's private." Sarah didn't back down. "Sir, I'm asking as someone responsible for your safety at 30,000 feet. If you have a medical emergency up there, I need to know what's in your system." Prince stared at her, and in that moment Sarah saw a man drowning in secrets, desperate to tell someone the truth, but terrified of the consequences. "Pain medication," Prince finally said. "For my hips, my back, years of performing. I've had chronic pain for over a decade. And sometimes, when it gets bad, I take more than I should. That flight from Atlanta, I took too much trying to manage the pain for the flight, and I had a reaction. Thought I was having a heart attack. Now I'm terrified to fly, because what if it happens again, and nobody can help me?" Sarah understood the full picture now. Prince wasn't just having a panic attack. He was caught in a cycle of pain management and medication that was creating new problems while trying to solve old ones. And his fear of public exposure was preventing him from getting proper help. "Mr. Nelson, I'm going to be very honest with you. What you're describing is serious. The pain medication you're taking, especially if you're taking more than prescribed, can cause the symptoms you experienced. And if you keep flying while taking these medications without medical supervision, you're putting yourself at serious risk." Prince's response revealed his desperation. "But if I don't fly, I can't work. If I can't work, I'm not Prince anymore. I'm just a guy with chronic pain who can't do what he was born to do." Sarah saw the trap Prince was in. The performing was causing the pain. The pain was requiring medication. The medication was creating new problems. And the fear of anyone knowing was preventing him from finding solutions. Sarah made her third major decision of the day, one that definitely violated professional boundaries but felt morally necessary. "Okay, here's what I propose. We're going to fly to Minneapolis, but we're doing it differently. I'm going to stay in the cabin with you instead of the cockpit. My co-pilot can handle the flight. I'm going to monitor you the entire time and teach you techniques to manage the panic. But in exchange, you have to promise me something. When we land, you're going to see a doctor. A real doctor, not whatever you're doing now. Deal?" Prince looked skeptical. "I can't trust doctors not to sell my information." Sarah had an answer. "I have a doctor in Minneapolis. Former military, works with people who need privacy, specializes in pain management. I'll set up the appointment myself. You don't have to tell him you're Prince. You can use whatever name you want. But you need professional help, not just more of whatever medication you're currently taking." After a long silence, Prince nodded. "Okay. But you stay with me during the flight." Sarah agreed. She informed the co-pilot of the plan, moved into the main cabin, and they took off. What happened during that flight was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her 15 years of flying. For the first hour, Sarah talked Prince through breathing exercises every time his anxiety spiked. She explained what was happening in his body during a panic attack, demystifying the symptoms that terrified him. She shared stories from her paramedic days about other high performers who'd struggled with similar issues. And slowly, Prince began to open up in ways he clearly never had with anyone. "I started performing when I was 7, Prince said during one of their conversations. By the time I was 20, my body was already hurting from the dance moves and the jumps, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant being ordinary. And being ordinary meant being invisible. So I just kept pushing through." Sarah listened without judgment, understanding that Prince wasn't looking for advice. He was looking for someone who would hear him without immediately trying to fix him or exploit him. "The pain got worse after Purple Rain," Prince continued. "All those concerts, all those performances in heels, all those splits and jumps, my hips were destroyed by the time I was 30. I had surgery, but it didn't fix everything. The doctors prescribed pain medication, and, at first, it worked. But over the years, I needed more to get the same effect. And I knew I was becoming dependent, But what was the alternative? Not perform? Not be Prince? Sarah understood the impossible choice Prince had faced. His artistry required physical performance that was destroying his body. Managing the pain required medication that was creating dependency. And his public image required projecting invincibility that prevented him from admitting any of this. "You're not weak for needing help," Sarah said. "You're human." Every person I ever treated in emergency medicine, from homeless people to CEOs, they all bled the same. Pain doesn't care about fame. Prince was quiet for a moment. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" Sarah asked. "Of stopping," Prince said. "Of what happens when I can't perform anymore. Of who I am without the music. Of dying and having people discover that the genius was just a broken guy in pain pretending to be superhuman." Sarah's response was gentle but firm. "You're not pretending to be superhuman. You are superhuman. But superhumans still need help sometimes. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." The flight continued, and Sarah taught Prince progressive muscle relaxation techniques, grounding exercises, and cognitive strategies for managing panic. By the time they began descent into Minneapolis, Prince's breathing had normalized, his color had returned, and while he was still anxious, he wasn't in crisis. Sarah had successfully talked him through the flight. After they landed, Sarah kept her promise. She personally drove Prince to Dr. James Morrison, a pain management specialist who'd treated military personnel with chronic injuries and understood the need for confidentiality. Sarah didn't sit in on the appointment, but Dr. Morrison later told her that Prince had been surprisingly honest about his pain levels and medication use, perhaps because Sarah's intervention had created a crack in the wall Prince had built around his struggles. Dr. Morrison put Prince on a supervised pain management program that included physical therapy, alternative treatments, and a carefully monitored reduction in medication dosage. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than what Prince had been doing. For several months, Prince seemed to improve. He called Sarah twice to thank her and to say the new treatment plan was helping. But then the calls stopped. And on April 21, 2016, Sarah woke up to the news that Prince had died from an accidental overdose of fentanyl. She was devastated. She immediately wondered if she could have done more, should have been more forceful, should have violated his privacy, and sought more aggressive intervention. The guilt was crushing. Sarah kept silent about the plane incident for 2 years after Prince's death. She felt bound by privacy considerations and unsure if sharing the story would help anyone or just be seen as exploiting a tragedy. But in 2018, after watching countless news stories about the opioid epidemic and seeing how many people were dying from the same cycle Prince had been caught in, Sarah decided to speak. She wrote an article for a medical journal about the incident, keeping Prince anonymous but detailing how celebrity status and fear of public exposure can prevent people from seeking adequate treatment for pain and addiction. The article went viral, and Sarah began speaking at medical conferences about the unique challenges of treating high-profile patients who prioritize privacy over health. Sarah never blamed Prince for his death. She understood that addiction and pain management are complex issues without simple solutions. But she did blame a culture that makes people feel like they have to hide their struggles, that equates needing help with weakness, that forces people to choose between their public image and their private health. Prince died because he was caught in systems that failed him, Sarah said in one interview. The medical system that couldn't guarantee his privacy, the entertainment industry that demanded he perform through pain, and the cultural system that told him seeking help was admission of weakness. The story of that flight has become a teaching case in both aviation medicine and addiction treatment. It demonstrates how trained intervention can save lives in the moment, while also highlighting the systemic failures that prevent long-term solutions. Sarah's decision to stay in the cabin with Prince instead of flying from the cockpit has been praised as an example of putting human welfare above protocol, though some aviation experts have criticized it as a safety risk. Sarah no longer flies private jets. She now works as a consultant for airlines on medical emergency protocols and teaches courses on recognizing and responding to passenger health crises. Every class begins with the same statement. The person sitting in that seat isn't just a passenger or a client or a celebrity. They're a human being who might be struggling with things you can't see. Your job is to see them anyway. This story teaches us something crucial about fame, pain, and the impossible choices people face when their public image conflicts with their private struggles. Prince was one of the most talented artists in history, but he was also a human being dealing with chronic pain and medication dependency. The same qualities that made him a legend, his perfectionism, his work ethic, his commitment to maintaining mystique, ultimately prevented him from getting the comprehensive help he needed. Sarah Chen saved Prince's life on that flight. She gave him several more months than he might have had. But she couldn't save him from the larger forces, the pain, the addiction, the pressure, the fear of exposure that eventually took him. And that failure, that inability to prevent the inevitable, is something Sarah still carries. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have forced the issue," she reflected in a recent interview. "Should have called an ambulance that day regardless of what he wanted. But I also know that taking away someone's agency, forcing treatment on them, doesn't always work either. Prince had to want to be saved. And I think part of him did. But another part of him was too scared of what being saved might cost." The legacy of that flight is complicated. It's a story of successful intervention and ultimate failure. Of a professional who did everything right in the moment but couldn't prevent the tragedy that came later. Of a legend who wanted help but couldn't fully accept it. And of a system that fails people when privacy and stigma prevent them from accessing the care they desperately need. Prince's panic attack at 30,000 feet wasn't just about fear of flying. It was about the weight of being superhuman when you're feeling all too human. And sometimes, no amount of professional intervention can save someone from that burden.